This is my book, which was published 10 years ago now. I've still got a few copies left. And that's my email address if you want to send me any questions or information later on. And I'm doing a list of all the contacts of links to websites and different things that I mention afterwards that I'll send to Mark, and he can circulate it. So I can include on it, you know, if you think of anything to ask me about at the end, I can put those on as well. Now, how do I advance this to the next one? Oh. Hang on. How do I go back? There we are. Okay. So, well, I usually start off by telling people about the 6th major extinction and the massive declines in biodiversity and all that sort of thing. But I think we've had enough of Armageddon for the last few weeks, so I won't go into that too much. But I think being Wildlife Trust members, you all know about this problem we have with biodiversity dying out. Actually, I'm quite encouraged with how the wildlife is coming into the towns already, like the Llandudno goats coming off the Great Orme into the street and lots of other stories like that. And it's been quite interesting how much the wildlife is recovering in just a short number of weeks with us stopping interfering with them. And I hope some scientists are monitoring how much, for example, the insects are coming back with the less pollution in the atmosphere from all the traffic fumes and airplane fumes. Trouble is, as recorders, I'm county recorder for butterflies for Flintshire and Denbighshire, and we're being told not to encourage our recorders to go out because it's not complying with government rules about not travelling to where you're going to walk and do your exercise. And I know they've relaxed this in England now, but they haven't in Wales yet. They're still saying we shouldn't travel to walk, so we're not travelling to our wildlife reserves to check on the records there, which is a bit of a shame because we're not going to get many records for this year if that goes on. And so it's really important for all of you with gardens, if you're keeping records of everything you see in your garden, and you can either send it to us or you can send it into CONWY. I'll tell you about them later. And this will help us have some records for this year. So I'm sure you know the reasons for the declines in insects and wildlife in general is due to loss of habitat. And this is actually my meadow in Flintshire, which is a lowland wet meadow that hasn't been a working farm since before the war. So it's still got all the wildflowers and the old-fashioned grasses in it. And this is now very rare. There's only about 2% of those meadows left in the whole of Britain. So this is being bequeathed to the Wildlife Trust in my will, which is just being finalised now because of coronavirus. I finally got around to doing it. And the two small meadows here which are full of wildlife. But most of our farmland doesn't look like this anymore. And building development after the war also meant that there were lots of distant islands of wildlife. And this is a problem with decreasing habitat. And hedgerows are often the last refuge. This is a verge just up from where I live. And this is what might have been in the edges of the fields years ago. We've got red campion, the yellow is greater celandine, there's bluebells there and white stitchwort. Later on there'll be bird's foot trefoil along the edge of the road and cow parsley along the top there. And just like a herbaceous border that you might plant until the council mowers come through. And it's all very well when they do this thing of, you know, they lay the mower down 1 metre in from the edge of the road if you've got a nice wide verge like this. But a lot of our banks in North Wales, like this bottom one, they turn the mower on its side and it just scrapes off all the wildflowers. And this used to be done in the middle of May. And this is also disturbing any bumblebee nests that might be in the soil. So if you see this sort of thing going on round your way, do email or write to the council and say they're destroying the biodiversity and they have a statutory duty to maintain that. However, again, with lockdown and with the severe cuts on funding for councils, they are doing less of this now, and a lot of the counties are doing much better with preserving wildlife in the verges. So our farmland and the towns are a desert now for them, and the road verges are often cut too soon. But we can help create wildlife corridors with our gardens, however small. You may not be lucky enough to have a very big garden, but if you join up with all the other gardens, there's something like 2 million acres in the British Isles. And if you have some connection, like a hedge that wildlife can get through, or, you know, the Hedgehog Society are saying, put a hole in the bottom of your fence next to your neighbour that a hedgehog can get through, you're increasing the movability through this corridor. Now, I just put this in to embarrass Gillian, because this is her kneeling down there. Jill, our partner of Mark there, who's running this session for us, helped me plant this wildlife garden at the RSPB CONWY in about 2001, I think it was, Jill, or was it 2000, something like that. So 20 odd years ago, this is the first one I did. And this area is actually much more shaded now, because this wasn't long after the reserve was created, and those little trees there at the back are much, much bigger now, and this area is shaded. But we planted a lot of you know, things like wallflowers and honesty and things in here all that time ago. And Jill used to go down to look after it, because I live a bit further away. I live near Holywell, and Jill would go down and have a look how it was getting on after we planted it up. And I saw her a few weeks later, and she said, "Oh, Jan, I don't know if I've done wrong." But I went down to see the garden, and there were cabbage white caterpillars all over the nasturtiums. So I picked them off and I trod on them. Did I do the wrong thing? And well, of course, I had to laugh, because the cabbage white is our most common butterfly. So, you know, it's not really a great loss. But the thing is, you know, we have to get used to this idea that if we want to have the insects to do the pollinating, we've got to have the eggs and the larvae that eat the plants first. So you've got to have a different mindset about what you put up with in the garden. And I think that's the point about wildlife gardening. It's being more relaxed, really, just more less worried about things eating your plants, because that means that's part of the ecosystem. And this is the sort of structure that they say is the most useful. Apparently, research on biodiversity has shown that greatest biodiversity happens at the edges of habitats, and our gardens are like a woodland edge. So if you think of it, if you've got trees around, or you've got a tree at the end of your garden, and then you might have a hedge, or you've got shrubs, flowering shrubs, and then you've got shorter herbaceous plants, maybe in a flower border, and then you've got maybe a bit of lawn, short grass, and even gravel and hardcore or decking. These are also useful, especially in our cold climate, for insects and invertebrates to bask on, because they are cold-blooded animals. They can't generate their own body heat like mammals can, so they depend on being able to lay out in the sun to warm themselves up before they can function. And this is a very important part of their habitat. So they need all these different layers of habitat. And if you can arrange this in your garden, even a small garden, if you've got one tree, and you've got a couple of bushes, and then you've got some flowers and some grass and a bit of a path, you've got this structure. So, you know, this is all part of what you should be aiming at. 4 levels, so lawn and bare ground. And then think about what wildlife we like in the garden, because it's your garden. You know, get some purists who get cross with me about putting poison down for rats, or you know, you get people say, oh, you've got to have stinging nettles for butterflies. You haven't got to have anything. It's your garden, like your house. You can control it how you want to. A garden is a very small part of the countryside. It's your extension of your living space, and you can control it how you want to. But so a lot of people like to see the butterflies, but they don't like the cabbage whites that eat their cabbages. A lot of people understand that bees are important now, but they don't like things that sting, like wasps and honeybees. Lots of people like birds, but there are some birds which people don't like, and there are hedgehogs, but we don't like rats and mice and rabbits. So what can we do about some of these things that we don't like? Wood pigeons are a real pain in my garden at the moment. This is my netting tunnel. I know it looks a bit of a mess, but I grow wildflowers around my vegetables to draw in the pollinators and also the predators to eat the pests. But I've got this old tunnel frame from a previous tunnel, and I've stretched bird netting. I don't know if you can see, there's black netting over the whole frame. You can get this at the garden centres, you can get it online, and it's joined together with little cable ties, and that keeps the pigeons out. However, the blackbirds and the rabbits seem to be able to get underneath, so it's still not foolproof, but at least it keeps some things out. It would keep badgers out, would keep deer out as well. I don't think we have deer problem in this part of the country, but many places they do. And that along the edge there, along the edge of the border, I planted a hedge of buckthorn, which is the larval food plant for the brimstone butterfly. This beautiful yellow butterfly with the pointed wings. It's quite scarce in North Wales, and we think that's simply because buckthorn wasn't used as hedging plant in this part of the world, but it is in Cheshire, it is in South Wales, it is in the south of England. So every community garden or school garden I do, I try to plant in at least one of these buckthorn. And here's the brimstone caterpillar, lays along the spine of the leaf, eats the leaf of the buckthorn. Now, you don't have to be worried about it eating anything else. I think a lot of people don't realise that butterflies are very, very specific on what they eat as caterpillars. So just because a green caterpillar like this, looking like this, might be eating your cabbages, it won't be eating anything else. And just in the same way, this green caterpillar is eating the buckthorn. That means it's a brimstone, and it won't be eating your cabbages. So you don't have to worry about seeing caterpillars on anything else. Other things we don't like in the garden, slugs and snails. Well, there are iron-based slug pellets now, which are supposed to be much less dangerous. We think that hedgehogs that eat the slugs and snails are getting poisoned by the secondary poisoning from the metaldehyde slug pellets, which used to be the old ones. So try not to use those. But there's lots of other things you can do, like using beer traps or these dry matting things. And also to encourage frogs and lizards and ground beetles and lots of other creatures that will eat the slugs and snails. We don't like plant destroying insects, but again we can encourage their predators by planting the flowers the predators like. And you can also get organic predator control from Green Gardener and other suppliers that are very effective in controlling whitefly and slugs and vine weevil, but they don't affect any other insects. And you can even grow vegetables in the conservatory. This is what I've been doing since the week before the lockdown, because I was a fan of those disaster movies when I was younger, and I've saved all my seeds from previous years. And these are French beans, actually. Sorry, it's out of focus, but this is French bean in my conservatory today, forming there. And I've got, so there's French beans at the back in sort of like plastic troughs on a table. And this is runner beans going all the way up the wall. This is broccoli. Here's flowers on my tomato plants. There's peas at the front. So I've got, and this is broad beans in my polytunnel. And this definitely keeps pests off, apart from whitefly. I get terrible whitefly in the conservatory, but these little white cards here are what I get from Green Gardener, and they have a parasitic wasp eggs on them, and they hatch out and they control the whitefly very effectively, quite quickly. You have to keep redoing them, I find, because the whitefly build up again. So that's another little thing we can do during lockdown, if we can get the seeds anymore. You can also take cuttings. I'll do a blog about that on my website. Cuttings from broccoli and things like that, that you've already got growing. The Wildlife Gardening Forum is a great organisation that I've been involved with for many years, and I used to organise the conferences for them. They normally have a conference twice a year, but of course it's been cancelled this year because of the lockdown. But you can still go on their Facebook page, and you get lots of people on there giving you advice and sharing their photos and their experience of their wildlife gardening, which is really useful, very friendly. Nobody treats you, well, sometimes, like I said, they got cross with me when I said I poisoned the rats, but usually people are not at all superior, and they're just trying to learn and enjoy the garden and the wildlife and share their experiences. So let's have a look at habitats. We're all about creating different habitats if we want as much biodiverse wildlife as possible. And at ground level, we've got things like this. I don't know if you've ever seen a little volcano like this in dry grassy lawn. It's made by this little tawny mining bee, or Adrena fulva, and it makes this little tunnel into the ground. And it's one of over 250 species of wild bees that don't sting and are better pollinators, or more useful pollinators, than honeybees. There's only one species of honeybee, and you have to farm it. But we've got 250 species of different little bees like this, which don't do any harm, but they're really important pollinators. But they're also suffering because they've lost habitat. So if you see these sort of little holes in your lawn, don't worry about them. You can mow over the top on a high setting, and they will be gone in a month or so. So pollination is important for at least a third of our food crops, and we need to help these wild bees, as well as the bumblebees, which are other wild bees. So we only got 6 or 7 species left of wild honeybees. But again, you can see they've got different mouth parts. Some have long, stiff proboscis, some have soft mouth parts, and they have evolved alongside different flower shapes to pollinate different flower types. So that's why we need so many different bees. It's not okay to say, oh, well, you know, it doesn't matter. If we've got 250, then it doesn't matter if 100 of them die out anyway. Well, it does, because it means that those plants that have evolved alongside that particular pollinator will also die out. And here is one of those little tunnels made in the edge of my herb garden. I've got a very damp garden, and I could never grow herbs and things like thymes, marjoram, and other sort of alpine plants. So I had this area dug out and filled with rubble, limestone rubble, and I can grow lavender and thymes and things in it very successfully now. But then I started seeing these little holes, and it was these mining bees And that's what it looks like underneath. You can see this is, they dig quite a deep tunnel, and that's why it's got to be quite sandy, free draining soil. They make little cells in which they lay one egg, and then they put in a ball of pollen and nectar to feed the larva, and then they seal the cell up, and then they go off and leave it. And the larvae will hatch out. This is actually the ball of nectar and pollen that's left for the food. This is the egg here, and that will hatch out in the tunnel and feed up on the wet food and turn into this lovely fat maggot. Now, if you dug in your garden and you found that, you might think, ooh, it's a vine weevil, and kill it. But it's not. It's actually very important. It's a young bee, which is going to hibernate there until next year now, and then come out and pollinate your flowers. So very important to not harm this one. Now, lots of people talk about these bee houses, and here is mine, made of a stack of pallets on the right, which is fun to do with children because you can experiment with different types of tubes and cardboard and grass and see what you can get nesting in them. And you can pull them out and just one at a time and tap them out into a collecting tray so that you can have a look what's in them. But I personally only found 2 types of bee that use this type of house, and they're both osmia type bees, the rufous mining bee and the leaf cutter bee, and they need holes of a particular diameter. You've got to get the size right. I think the next picture shows it. There we are. You've got to get these ones that I buy in are cardboard with paper linings, and this is one of the rufous mining bees, the osmia, and they like this paper. They chew it up. They go down to the end, which has to be blocked, and they lay an egg, and then they put a little bit of nectar and pollen in the cell, and then they block it up with masticated mud and this paper, and then they lay another egg, and then they block that up, and so on right to the end. And then they'll just go off and leave them there all through the winter, and they'll hatch out next year. And this was quite fun because last year I had these, again, are the same diameter, but they're just square ones because they're made with a machine. And this was all sealed up from the previous year. You can see the mud sealing up the end. But this bee was flying backwards and forwards, scrabbling at trying to open some of the tunnels, and I couldn't work out why. And I thought, well, it doesn't look like a predator. It looks like one of the same species that's laid its eggs in there. So I took this photo and I put it up on a Facebook page for there's the Bees, Wasps and Ants Facebook page as well. And within about 10 minutes, one of them came back and said, oh, that's the male. He can smell, or he can sense the pheromones from the female that is hatching inside, and he's trying to get at her before any of the other males do. So this is, you know, the selfish gene thing, that the male has to be ready to mate with the female as soon as she appears, so that nobody else does, and then he is the one that survives to go on to make the next generation, or his genes do. So all these interesting things you discover through keeping these different you know, nesting habitats in your garden. Here he is fighting off a leaf cutter bee. There was a terrific fight going on. So this is very blurred, I'm afraid, but this cell was filled in green because it's a leaf cutter bee which chews up stiff leaves like rose leaves, they like, to seal the cell. And he's more sort of black and white striped one underneath, and the osmia is fighting him off for some reason. So all this excitement going on. You see these David Attenborough films and you think, wow, all these exotic things that go on in other countries, but actually, you know, it happens in your own back garden if you take time to sit there and watch it. And you've got the internet to help you identify what's happening, which is fantastic. Going back to the winter and willows. This is my stand of different coloured willows. You can grow it like people grow dogwood. You can cut it down every other year, and then you can use the different coloured stems to make obelisks for the garden, or for bean poles, or to make baskets. And they're really useful for pollinators because the catkins come out very early in the spring, March, early March usually, and they're some of the first pollen for bees and butterflies and moths that are coming out of hibernation. And then you can make living structures. This is one I did in Rill, the school in Rill. Here we are making a dome, a circular dome, and you can stick quite long poles of willow, living willow, into the ground as long as you get them a foot deep. So here we are banging a crowbar into the ground, and that's how I keep the kids warm. We have to do this in winter when the willow's dormant, and I've got them singing a song and banging away at the crowbars to make the holes all the way around for making a structure. And then you can make these sort of tunnels and outdoor classrooms and domes for children to play in the summer. In the spring, there's relatively few flowers in spring for butterflies. The bees are a bit more adaptable. The bees tend to go for these lipped flowers, don't they? And it's very often that, again, it's the type of insect has evolved alongside the flower. These flowers with lips, they need the weight of the bumblebee to land on the bottom lip, and that forces the flower open so they can get in to the nectar. And in doing that, they stroke against the pollinia where the pollen is, and then that's how they take it to another flower of the same type. So you don't often see butterflies on those type of flowers because they don't like getting their wings stuck in a tubular flower. And you'll see butterflies more on these open flowers, especially in the spring, the cabbage family, and that's what the Albrecia and the wallflower are, cabbage family. You can tell because they've just got the 4 petals. And then in the spring and the summer, you've also got foxgloves and viper's bugloss, this beautiful blue flower, which is fantastic for bees. And scabious of all kinds is great for butterflies and bees. So are thymes, and comfrey is fantastic for bumblebees. Oh, tubular flower again. Marjoram is very attractive. You can eat this marjoram, but this is wild marjoram. And if you look, you can actually see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 bumblebees and a butterfly just on this small area of them growing, again in a limestone rubbly kind of pile. They don't like a lot of fertility. And in autumn, goldenrod is great for hoverflies. Now, we tend to forget about hoverflies as pollinating insects, but actually they're just as important as bees and butterflies and moths. And they go for certain plants that not necessarily the bees go for. So you can see a number of different species of hoverfly here. They also like knapweed, which looks like a thistle, but it's not thistle family. But they do love thistles as well. All kinds of bees and butterflies love thistles. And just to say a minute about flowering lawns. There's been a campaign recently to let your lawn just grow during May. Well, it's all very well, but a lot of people find that if they let the lawn grow too long, then come the end of the summer, if we have a wet summer or a wet autumn, as we often do, you get all this dead grass, it flops over, and you can't get the mower through it anymore. You can't even get the strimmer through it anymore. very difficult to cut it and control it, and it just looks awful. So what I've been experimenting with for several years is letting the lawn grow for 3 or 4 weeks before cutting it with the mower. And amazing how many these little flowers come up and flower during that time, just like the daisies do. I mean, over there's lots of daisies, but also the dandelions, which are so important early in the spring for the bees and butterflies coming out of hibernation. But also here we've got dove's foot cranesbill, a little wild geranium, this purple flower in here. This is just taken a couple of days ago on my lawn, and it's just not been cut for 2 or 3 weeks. So we keep it mown, but at a higher level than the rest of the lawn, and then we get different things in it. Here's the close-up of the dove's foot cranesbill, which is also a larval food plant for the brown Argus butterfly. Here's bird's foot trefoil, which is larval food plant for the blue butterflies, and lots of other things. And even I found a little cowslip in the lawn a couple of days ago, and the nearest cowslips are 50 meters away, but they've somehow seeded themselves in here. Lady's smock in the wet patches, and there's a green-veined white butterfly on it, and there's a dear little common frog hopping around in the wet grass near the pond. Of course, you have to be a bit careful of those when you're doing the mowing and strimming, but if you go slowly, they will usually get out of the way quick enough. Bird's foot trefoil is a really important plant. Sometimes its common name is eggs and bacon because the buds can have red tips on them. It's not only the larval food plant for a number of butterflies and moths, it's also important for bumblebees because it has higher protein content in its pollen and than many other plants. And bumblebees and a lot of the solitary bees don't make honey like honeybees do to live on when it's bad weather back at home. So they have to get what they need when they forage. So if we have a wet summer, like we often do, and they can't go out for several days, then the colony just dies. So this is a really important plant. You see it growing beside the road. It's one of those things actually that doesn't mind being mown off because it grows from a very, very low growing point. And so you can have it in your lawn and mow it, and it'll come back and flower again. And these are some of the things that have to feed on bird's foot trefoil, different moths and the bumblebees. Brownfield sites are similar to gardens because they have different areas of hard standing and grass and shrubs. This is RHYDYMWYN site near Mould, which some of you might know. It's where they used to manufacture mustard gas during the war. 80,000 tons of chemical weapon was manufactured here in the Second World War, not the First World War, and stored here. It's a huge site, and thankfully they never had to use any of it. But because the ground was so polluted, nobody has been allowed to go on it since then, except us few researchers and recorders. And so it's become fantastically good for wildlife because people have left it alone for 70 years. There's wild, rare butterflies like this dingy skipper and a grayling. There's a lot of larval food plants in the grass here. There's rubbly areas that reflect the light onto the wings of insects to help them warm up. Again, these cold-blooded invertebrates and insects have to have different heat regimes in different times of the day and different times of the year. This dark tarmac absorbs the heat and then throws it out again like a storage heater when it gets cold. So that's a good area for them to warm up. And these areas also for shelter and nesting. And the old buildings are like caves, and that's where we have colonies of horseshoe bats, which are quite rare now. So brownfield sites actually much more important than greenfield sites. You know, people say, oh, we shouldn't build on the green belt. Well, I'm sorry, but the green belt is a desert now because it's so intensively farmed. It's actually our brownfield sites which we need to protect. 14% of our red data species are endangered species now live on brownfield sites. And gardens are actually classed as brownfield sites because they're ones that people have interfered with, basically. So this is why we want to recreate some of these kind of habitats. Like this is brown roof or a green roof on a shed, and a chap called Dusty Gedge and his mate John Little have made a number of these brownfield roofs in cities like London, and they've now got peregrine nesting on them. They've got rare beetles on them. They're getting all sorts of species, even in the middle of cities when they're making these habitats on the rooftops. You could have a wildflower meadow that roots in a very shallow depth. You can have all sorts of things growing in this habitat. And ponds, people always tell you if you have a wildlife garden, you must have a pond. A pond doesn't have to be a deep water pond. In fact, it's better, we've found, if you have quite shallow ponds, because that warms up quicker. Again, in our climate, that's quite important for tadpoles and things like that. Early in the year, newts need warm water. So even if it's only like 6 inches deep, it's enough. So a bog garden with a bit of some puddles in it is probably more productive for all kinds of wildlife than a deep pond. You don't want any fish in it because they will eat the larvae and the tadpoles and things like that. And need a ramp for mammals to get in and out. These two pictures here, this is a fantastic little leafhopper called Cicidella or Cicadella viridis, which is apparently quite common in boggy areas in North Wales. And I just went over to one of my ponds in August one year, and there were loads and loads of these coming out on the reeds and mating. This is the male displaying to the female. Gorgeous blue and turquoise colours. Related to the things that make the cuckoo spit on the grasses and things that you see. And this is what some people call star jelly. Again, I found this one autumn next to my pond, and I couldn't think what on earth it was. I wondered if it was a slime mold or something. I put it on the Facebook page, and straight away some people came back and said, oh, that's infertile frog spawn. Apparently, nobody knows why, frogs and toads eject this jelly stuff, which they would use to suspend their eggs in the spring. They sometimes eject it beside the pond in the winter, and very strange to find that. Well, I don't know why. So there's lots of things you can do with a pond to help kids learn about wildlife, and it's always great fun to do some pond dipping. I was running a wildlife watch group for children for a couple of years, and here we are. This was Easter Sunday, I think, a couple of years ago, and we're seeing what we can find in the pond and tipping it into white trays to have a look through the microscope. And here is my moth trap with a very bright light. We had one session in the summer called Things That Go Bump in the Night, and we had a moth trap out and we had a bat detector so the kids could come late. We did it in the summer holidays so the kids could stay up late, which is one of the fun things about it. We didn't start until about 9 o'clock at night. Then we went over to the woods and sat and waited for the badgers to come out of the badger set, and we watched the barn owls hunting over the field. So it was all quite good fun. And another thing we did another time was press some wildflowers. I feel very strongly about this thing about we're not allowed to pick wildflowers, because I learnt all the wildflower names by the time I was 10, because we used to have wildflower competition at school. And I went to about 3 different primary schools because we moved around a bit. And each time we got to a new one, we seemed to be in time to do the wildflower competitions. So I learned a lot of flowers in different parts of the south of England. And this is where we've got, the Wildlife Trust have got a small meadow reserve in Dizeth called Maes Heraddag. and it's a beautiful place full of wildflowers, and they scythe it every year in about July. So I got permission from CCW for us to take the wildlife watch group there the week before they were due to scythe it, and we picked any wildflowers we could see and laid them out on blotting paper, and then a volunteer made a wildflower press for me and we pressed them. Now it looks as if the young lad is a bit bored with all this. This is his paper bag for collecting flowers, and he's looking at his phone, but he's not playing a game, he's actually using an app on his phone to help him identify the flowers. And there are lots of apps like this now, just about for everything you can find an app to identify. If you go onto the CONWY website, that I'll give you the link for in the details we'll send around later, they have got an app on there which connects you up via the satellite to them, so that it knows your grid reference. You don't have to know the grid reference yourself. If you're just out walking, you can take a photograph of anything, whether it's butterfly or frog or newt or wildflower, and send it to CONWY, and it will send the grid reference with it, and they will help identify it for you, and that will help them get lots more records, especially this year when, like I said, recorders are being told not to go out and do their normal recording. And this is something else you can do in the garden. This year it'll be from the 19th of July to 11th of August. Just have to sit for 15 minutes in your garden. You can print off the ID chart from this website, bigbutterflycount.org, and it's in Welsh as well as English. And you write in the little box how many of these butterflies you see, and then you go back on the website and put the details in, and something like 35,000 people have taken part the last few years, and this is a huge amount of citizen science for butterfly conservation, the charity that is trying to save our butterflies from extinction. So it's a really fun thing to do with children as well, and a useful thing for science. The Bumblebee Conservation Trust also does bee walks, counting the bumblebees. This is a diagrammatic form of all our bumblebees that we've got left, and this is to help you identify the particular species of bumblebee and help them record the ones you've got. I'm on the Welsh Government task force for pollinators, which was founded a few years ago, and in 2013 we launched the action plan for pollinators in Wales. This is available in English and in Welsh from the Welsh Government website. Again, I'll give you the details for this later on. And we are also running a scheme called Be Friendly, and it's where you can get your community, your school, your business, your county council, or any group like that involved in helping to make an area more friendly to bees. And CONWY County Council was the first council in Wales to receive the award, and I managed to get Iolo Williams to come and present the certificate to them. This was back, quite early on in 2018, I think. So after lockdown, you might be interested in taking part in something like this with your neighbours' gardens or with your local school. You can find out about that on the website as well. And there's going to be a fantastic Wales Nature Week this year during lockdown from the 30th of May to 7th of June. Celebrate in your own garden, and you go onto the website and you can interact with Iolo Williams, Chris Packham, lots more experts come on to tell you how to identify different things in your garden and how to send in the records. There'll be quizzes for children, there'll be opening a moth trap live, and all sorts of social media events. So look out for that. Again, I'll give you the link to that on the list later on. Plants for bees and butterflies in the autumn. Eupatoriums. This is the Joe Pye weed. I've got the national collection of these, so I've got a lot of, well, there aren't that many different kinds actually, but I've got a collection of them which you could normally see in August, September, October, and my garden was going to be open for the National Garden Scheme for the first time this year. Been fighting for years to get them to take wildlife gardens, and they've been very snooty about my garden being too messy. But I finally got them to take me this year, and now it's cancelled because of lockdown. But I'm thinking maybe I could do an interactive one online for you. I could actually go around and film some of it for you that time of year and share bits of it with you. So these are great for late autumn nectar for butterflies and bees, at the same time as Michaelmas daisies, which are after most of the buddleias are over, so useful for that. This is a photo that was taken by a professional photographer of my garden. This is some of the Eupatorium collection last year. And now I'll just talk a little bit about pest control, because we were saying how you know, one of the things we try not to do is not using insecticides. I'm sure this is one of the big things that is helping the decline of insects that we're all worried about. And of course, the birds of prey are fantastic pest control, not just for insects, but for rats and mice. And this is a gorgeous barn owl that was in my nesting box in my field a few years ago. There's the Flintshire Biodiversity Officer, Sarah Slater, catching the barn owl as it flies out of the nest box. She has a very long handle on this net and just taps the nest box in the daytime. That's when they're sleeping, of course, normally. And it frightens the male to come out, and they catch them and they ring them if they're not already ringed. And the babies are still in there. They've got a little trap door. They can climb up and get the babies out and ring them as well. And I know I'm very lucky to have this sort of field and the garden, and many of you will only have small gardens, but I just wanted to put this in to show you the habitat, because people seem to sometimes think that they can, if they buy the nest box and put it up, then they have a chance of getting the species. But it's only if you have the necessary habitat as well. And you see here, this is in June, July, I think it was even maybe the beginning of August. The grass is not cut or mown. I don't cut or mow the grass in the summer. And I don't do it every year either. I know a lot of the books will tell you you have to cut it at the end of July every year. But if you do that, then the butterflies and moths that hibernate in the dead stems over winter are destroyed. So you're breaking the life cycle. So that's why I started not cutting every field every year. I've got 4 small fields, and I cut and mow them, or I rent them out for horse grazing in the winter every other year. And that means that the grass, not only do I get more butterflies and moths, but the grass falls over the dead grass and the new grass grows up through it. And this makes lots of little tunnels underneath. Unbeknownst, I didn't realize this. I was just doing it for the moths and butterflies. And then I discovered that that means lots more mice and voles will nest in the field. And that's why I got barn owls coming in. So putting up the nest box, and then they came, but the habitat had to be there first. And the same thing, I've got kestrels and buzzards. And so, you know, it's about creating the habitat, and then things will come. Not always what you expect, but wildlife will come if there's habitat there. Growing plants to attract the predators of insects like aphids. So lacewings, hoverflies, ladybirds eat huge numbers of green fly and white fly and black fly. But they need certain flowers as well as part of their diet. And there are a number of flowers you can grow to attract them. Ground beetles are eating slugs and snails, and But if you were digging in the garden and you found something like this, you might think, ooh, it's a vine weevil or something nasty, or a baby earwig. But this is actually a ground beetle larva. So if you killed that, you would be doing yourself a disservice, because you would be killing one of your predators of slugs and snails. Again, if you saw something like this on your plants, you might want to whip it off and kill it. But these are actually larvae of hoverflies, which, as I mentioned before, are great destroyers of aphids. And lacewing eggs and larvae, see, this is a lacewing larva. Again, it doesn't look like a very nice thing, but there it is, eating an aphid. And this is a ladybird larva. It looks like a black dragon with orange spots. And here it is devouring a lot of black fly on a broad bean plant, I think it is. So you don't want to kill those, because they are your friend. Dragonflies eat huge amounts of mosquitoes, and they of course have very ugly looking larvae in the pond. And dear little hedgehogs, they eat lots of slugs and snails, of course, so we want to encourage them. So the rule of thumb is, if you don't definitely know it to be attacking your plants, for example vine weevil, then leave it alone. If you find odd grubs and maggoty looking things on your plants or in the soil, leave them alone. On the whole, they will be part of the ecosystem and important for the health of the garden. Common lizards and snakes eat lots of pests as well, and you find those in old walls and warm, dry, concrete, broken areas like that. Fungi and beetle larvae help to break down old wood, so don't be worried about seeing fungi on old trees. And so do many earthworms and many tiny soil organisms. So, you know, these are all magnified little tiny things that live in the soil. They're supposed to be, oh, I don't know how many tons of life there is actually in the soil. In a teaspoon of soil, there's more creatures, little creatures, than there are on the surface in terms of weight and volume. So it's really important to keep the soil alive and not put pesticides into it, but put organic material into it for them to eat. And then in the winter, ivy is the latest of flowers. This is November one year. All these little yellow pom-poms are on the second stage of ivy after about 10 years. If you've got a place to let it go wild over a roof or an old tree, very important for late nectar before they go into hibernation, and also dry places underneath for them to hibernate, but also good for nesting in the winter. And I think that's the end of the presentation.